How often do we think about how much it costs to have a roof over our heads? It's a deep question, isn't it? We often don't appreciate how safe and secure our homes make us feel. But for many middle-class Americans, affording a place to live is really tough. It's like a secret fight that happens behind closed doors. Let's talk about this problem, the rent crisis for middle-class Americans. Lots of people are affected, but not everyone notices or understands it. You might wonder why this problem isn't obvious. Well, the middle class is supposed to be doing well economically, but the truth is different. The cost of living keeps going up, but wages stay the same. Imagine earning the same amount of money every year while everything around you gets more expensive. Groceries, gas, school fees, and especially rent. This is the reality for many middle-class Americans today. Then there's another problem called gentrification. As cities grow, neighborhoods change. This often means higher property values and higher rents. What happens to families who have lived in these neighborhoods for years? They either have to pay more rent or move out, which can be really hard. The rent crisis for the middle class is a complicated problem, but it's really about people. It's about families struggling to keep a roof over their heads. It's about communities being affected by the high cost of living. It's about the middle class, which is an important part of our society, facing tough times. In this video, we'll talk about the rent crisis for middle-class Americans. We'll look at why it's happening, how it affects people, and most importantly, what we can do about it. Because understanding the problem is the first step to solving it. Let's start this journey together. Over the last 20 years, average wages went up only 3%. This means people are earning about the same, but rent prices keep going up. This makes it harder for people to afford a place to live. Especially for those who earn less money. They end up spending more than half of what they make on rent. That doesn't leave much for other important things like food or health care. Even though this problem is happening everywhere in the country, many people don't seem to notice or care. They think it's only a problem in big cities. But the facts show that it's a big issue in both cities and small towns. It's not just about struggling to pay rent. It's also about the stress and worry that come with it. Millions of middle-class Americans deal with this stress every day. The numbers show that this rent problem is getting worse, and we need to do something about it. This problem doesn't just affect people's bank accounts, it affects their whole lives. For example, worrying about rent all the time can make people really anxious or depressed. This can make it hard for them to do well at work or have good relationships. Over the past 20 years, average wages have increased by a mere 3%. This disparity between soaring rent prices and stagnant wages has created a widening gap that is growing harder to bridge each passing day. The situation is even more dire for those at the lower end of the wage spectrum. For these individuals, a significant portion of their income, often more than 50%, goes towards rent. This leaves little room for other necessities like food, healthcare, and education. Despite the clear imbalance, the issue continues to go unnoticed or is often brushed off as a problem confined to major metropolitan areas. However, data suggests otherwise. This is a nationwide crisis affecting communities big and small, urban and rural. It's also important to note that this crisis is not just about the inability to pay rent. It's about the stress, the fear, and the uncertainty that come with the struggle to keep a roof over one's head. It's about the unseen battle that millions of middle-class Americans are fighting every day. The numbers speak for themselves. The rent crisis is a growing issue that needs urgent attention. It's time for us to recognize this crisis for what it is. An unseen battle that threatens the stability and future of America's middle class. Let's not ignore the facts. Let's face them, understand them, and most importantly, act on them. The rent crisis affects more than just the middle-class bank accounts. In the shadow of the rent crisis, there's a hidden narrative that goes beyond the mere monetary implications. When we talk about the middle class, we often focus on the economic aspects. But the reality is the effects of this crisis spill over into other areas of life. Take mental health, for instance. The constant strain of worrying about making rent can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. These are not minor afflictions, but serious health concerns that can affect every aspect of a person's life, from their work performance to their relationships. While the richest 1% see their wealth grow really fast, the middle class struggles with not getting paid more and everything costing more. This big gap makes it really hard for middle-class families to pay for their homes and save money. Problems like houses being too expensive, rich people moving into poorer areas, and not fair pay all play a part in this problem. But it's important to know that we can fix these problems. People cause them, so people can change them. We need to make big changes to our system to fix the problem of expensive rent. How can we make it easier for people struggling to pay rent? This is a question being asked a lot by people who make decisions and those who try to make changes. Luckily, there are practical things we can do, and it's time to start working on them. First, let's talk about rent control laws. These laws can help keep rent prices from going up too much each year, protecting renters from having to pay way more all of a sudden. But these laws need to be done carefully to make sure they help both renters and landlords without causing other problems. Secondly, we can think about making the lowest pay higher. It's obvious that wages haven't kept up with how much things cost, making it harder for people to afford their homes. By making the lowest pay higher, more people can afford to pay for where they live. It's not just about having a roof over your head, it's also about being able to live with respect. Without worrying constantly about money, investing in cheap housing is another important part of solving the problem. We can't just expect businesses to fix this issue. It's time for the government to commit to making, keeping, and safeguarding affordable housing. This might mean giving perks to builders to make cheap homes or the government putting money into public housing. These solutions won't fix everything right away, but they're steps in the right direction. Remember, this isn't just about houses. It's about people being able to live well without paying too much for rent. So let's start working on this. Let's ask for rules that protect renters, ensure fair pay, and invest in cheap housing, because the middle class deserves better than just getting by. They deserve stability, security, and a place to call home. There are answers to the rent problem, and it's time to do something about it. The rent problem isn't just a number. It's a real issue for millions of Americans. As we deal with this tough problem, it's important to remember that we all can help. You might wonder, what can I do? Well, it begins with learning. Knowing about the rent problem helps us take meaningful action. There are lots of ways to learn. Books, documentaries, articles, blogs, podcasts. There's plenty of information out there. Find reliable sources that give different viewpoints. Learn about the history, causes, effects, and solutions to this rent problem. Once you know, it's time to speak up. Talk about the rent problem with your friends, family, and co-workers. Use social media to spread the word and start discussions that challenge things staying the same. But don't stop there. Get involved in your community. Go to local meetings, ask your leaders about their plans for the rent problem, and if they're not doing enough, hold them responsible. Your vote is important. Use it to support policies and candidates that care about affordable housing and fair rent. You can also help by donating or volunteering for organizations that fight for tenants' rights and affordable housing. Remember to be understanding of people's struggles. The rent crisis affects real people who are trying to make ends meet. We all have a part to play in fixing this problem. Let's work together to make things better. Thank you for joining us in understanding and addressing America's middle-class rent crisis. Together, we can bring about change.